the way that I sometimes think about it in comparing the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to other places of worship that I interact with is we do a good job of focusing on our members and taking care of our members. So if someone in the ward is struggling to, keep their lights on, the fast offerings of that ward are going to take care of that person. But when we look out into the broader community, we're not helping beyond kind of our circle and our membership as much as other congregations might be.
As the cold winds of winter sweep in, there's nothing like the warmth of a comforting cup to help you slow down and unwind. This is the season. Let Postum be your cozy companion. Made from roasted grains, Postum is caffeine-free and rich with a smooth roasted flavor. It's the perfect drink for those quiet, chilly mornings. Whether you're curled up with a good book, sharing a laugh with loved ones, or simply watching the snow fall outside, a cup of Postum is the moment you have been waiting for.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to This Week in Mormons. This is an interview edition with Matt and Melissa. Hello,
Hi,
Melissa.
Matt.
Hey.
Yeah, it's so funny when you start these so formally, you put on your broadcasting voice or something. I want you to start over and just do it like actually Matt would do it.
Listen, you make fun of me when I'm not. You do. You're like, hey, that's not the way you're supposed to talk on a podcast.
No, it's not that you're not supposed to. It's just that you don't seem like you to me. I'm like, what just happened to Matt? Did he turn on broadcaster voice? Here, I'll start.
Okay, you go, Melissa.
Hey, y'all. Welcome to This
everybody.
Week in Mormons. Hey, it's us, Matt and Melissa.
I went to high school in the 90s, and now I'm going to talk like I did.
Yeah. Okay, that was fun.
Okay.
I'm sorry to our guest, our delightful and actually probably deserves a professional introduction guest.
Yes, I'm super excited that we have Rebecca Glazier with us today. And Rebecca, I'm going to let you introduce yourself however you want to introduce yourself.
Hey, I am thrilled to be here. So thanks so much for having me. Matt and Melissa are just delightful together, and I'm thrilled to get to have a conversation with you. I'm a professor at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, and I direct a long-term community-engaged research project that looks at the benefits of congregations getting outside their own four walls and serving their community.
Awesome.
That's a really great way to introduce yourself.
Yeah, it is. Except for, what do you teach beyond this specific project that you've been working on? What classes do you teach?
Yeah, so I teach our Intro to International Politics course, which is a lot of fun because there's always something interesting happening. I teach a travel course that takes students to Washington, D.C. every spring to participate in Model Arab League. This summer, I'm taking students abroad to Spain. I teach our foreign policy class. And sometimes in a pinch, I teach American national government.
Yeah, that's broad. That sounds exciting.
So I've known Rebecca professionally for a number of years. And this is what I could say if I were to compare her with me. What I would say is my children wonder if I actually work for a living. And I guarantee Rebecca's children never wonder, does she have a job? Because she's always busy.
Because she has 8 jobs.
She does so much work.
So to be honest with you, I did a lot of community work and attending congregations and attending the fish fry and things like that while I was researching this book that I wrote. And my sweet son came to so many church services.
Wow.
So he definitely knows that I do research.
Yeah, that's cool. So
Is
that what you mean when you say congregations? You mean just different church groups?
Yeah. And in Little Rock, we actually have a pretty diverse religious community. So we also worked with Muslim congregations and Jewish congregations, Baha'i, Buddhist. So a good variety there.
Awesome.
So, Rebecca, I have a lot of friends that are very excited about your book, and I know that they're going to want to hear about this book. So we'll start with the book, and then we'll talk more about you and your life and who you are and stuff like that, if that's okay with you. Yeah,
I'm happy to. Like any good professor, I could talk about my research all day. So I appreciate the opportunity. So we've been doing this research in Little Rock, the research team that I work with and myself. I've worked with over 200 students, mentoring them and doing this community-based research since 2012, which is when we started. And we've been surveying and interviewing congregants and clergy and doing these in-depth case studies as well, doing focus groups, gathering both qualitative and quantitative data, to put it in technical terms. And after all of that, in more than a decade, we learned something that probably most of us already know deep in our hearts. And that's that community engagement is good. But when you go out and serve others, it's good for the members of these congregations. They feel happier and healthier and closer to God. It's good for the congregations themselves. Their members attend more often. They feel a greater sense of warmth with the other people who attend with them. And they're more likely to serve their own congregation. And when they feel so connected, they're also more likely to, give to their congregation as well. And as a
Yeah.
political scientist, there's also benefits at the next level up. Those aggregate to people who have more of a sense of political efficacy. They feel like their voice matters. So they're less likely to be jaded and tuned out of politics and more likely to care and get engaged.
Interesting. So when you're saying engaged, are you talking about, just going to church, or does it have to be a level higher than just going to church?
Yeah. So what we really found is when people go to church, there's all kinds of benefits from that. And in fact, there's a nice political science literature about how people can learn civic skills at church. But when they go outside of their church and serve the community, especially if they're doing that, like partnering with members of their own faith and working side by side in interfaith ways or with people that they know or with people that they just met, that is where you get all of these benefits. It's when you don't just serve your own congregation, but you go out and serve other people.
Okay.
So I'm thinking of this from the perspective of like my experience in Utah and Idaho. The only kind of community engagement that I can think of that I do in church, or most of the people I know do in church, is I get a calling, and maybe as part of that calling, I have to go, I don't know, work at a church farm, or maybe I go do canning for the church, or maybe I do something at Desert Industries or something like that. How does like engagement look different for people that are not in our church? And then I want to ask you like what people in our church could be doing differently.
Yeah, I think it's a great comparison to make because we measured both people's hours of service each month that they give to their place of worship, to their congregation, and the hours of service each month that they give outside, out in the community. And looking at that data, I'm sure it won't surprise you to hear that members of our church had really high service to their congregation, right? Because everyone is a volunteer. There's no paid ministry. We're all serving to help make the church run. But our hours of service outside the congregation were not quite as high, maybe, as some others, because we do give a lot of time to helping each other within our congregations. Other places of worship that we worked with out here in Little Rock, they're doing things like having a neighborhood cleanup or running a food pantry. Lots and lots of congregations have food pantries, or sometimes even doing like a formal organized prison ministry or like an addiction recovery ministry. We did find that the most common things that congregations are doing is providing counseling for marriage and families, which I think many clergy would say that the people who are coming to their office to talk to them or having issues, they're counseling them on their marriage and families. And the number two thing was helping with rent and utility assistance, just directly helping people who are struggling to make ends meet. And then food security was that next one, having the food pantries and things like that.
So that's interesting because our church like institutionalizes all of that, right? If someone were to say to me, "What do you do to help people in marriage problems in your ward?" or "What do you do to help people who need rent assistance?" I'd be like, "Well, I give to fast offerings and I pray for my bishop."
And I bet he appreciates that. It was not an easy job. Yeah, it is really interesting. And I think the way that I sometimes think about it in comparing the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to other places of worship that I interact with is we do a good job of focusing on our members and taking care of our members. So if someone in the ward is struggling to, keep their lights on, the fast offerings of that ward are going to take care of that person. But when we look out into the broader community, we're not helping beyond kind of our circle and our membership as much as other congregations might be.
Is the religious connection important? Like, I know a lot of people in their 20s aren't necessarily connected to a specific religion, but they do things like donate blood or help out at the food pantry. Is the religious component important?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think it is sometimes hard to tell to get that comparative data of young people who are attending churches and young people who aren't. But what we do know from the data in this book, Faith and Community, is that young people are really interested in doing that community engagement. And I do think there's something about the institution, the organization. I mean, when we look at other institutions in American life, there aren't really very many that bring people voluntarily together as frequently as worship services. And if a congregation is providing something beyond just the worship service, that's what draws young people in. So, for instance, in our survey, we asked people about the community issues that they think are most important. And then if they said that an issue was really important to them, we followed up by asking, would you want your congregation to get involved in it? And if they said yes, we followed up again and said, okay, but would you personally volunteer? And what we saw across the board was that young people were more likely to want to volunteer. And in fact, they actually give more hours of service to their congregation and outside of their congregation than the other age cohorts that we looked at.
So let me kind of throw this at you, because I know Melissa thinks about YSA wards all the time because that's the calling she's in. So my perspective on a YSA ward is you have activities where you provide food, a little bit of fun, dancing, maybe socializing. It seems like most of the activities are geared around trying to create social interactions between guys and girls. So would you suggest a YSA ward try to get involved in the community in some sort of service as a thing? Like, is that a different way and perhaps a better way to engage young people in like a YSA ward?
Yeah, in fact, young people want that. They want meaningful opportunities to live out their faith. And so if you could connect your YSA ward to, say, a food bank or a nonprofit that's providing meals to the homeless, or some other organization that consistently needs help, and have them sign up for, one Wednesday night a month that they help provide that meal to the homeless, or one Saturday a month they go and help package things up at the food bank. That would build greater cohesion and warm feelings among those YSAs than having them, play another game of volleyball and eat donuts.
But I wonder if on the flip side that there's also some contribution to like the disaffection, because if my church doesn't want to support causes like for the LGBTQ community or for climate change or for things that, I deeply feel are important, but my church isn't involving themselves in those kinds of things, does it have the same adverse reaction? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think that is a reason that a lot of young people are being disaffected from religion, is because they feel like it doesn't line up with their values. And here's where I think that the clergy leadership is really critical. And it's what our data show as well, is that when the clergy leaders talk about a service project or an engagement topic in terms of religion instead of in terms of politics, then people are more likely to want to be engaged and feel connected to the church and to generate that warmth that we see in the data.
Interesting.
So, yeah. So I'll just give you a quick example. Here in Little Rock, our church has actually partnered with a Black Protestant church to do a program to help reduce maternal mortality in the Black female population in our city, which is disastrously, heartbreakingly high. And that effort is supported by a Republican governor and a Democratic mayor. And our, maybe more frequently politically conservative church and a politically liberal Black Protestant church are all coming together because the issue of maternal mortality is one that all of those people care about. Now, you could frame that issue as a political issue, right? And there could be people in any of those congregations who might be able to pick at it and say, this feels too political here. But if you have the leadership telling their members, we are helping this population or we are engaging in this service for religious reasons, then people are going to be more likely to do it and to work together.
Did you look at how it affects feelings about people in other churches? So in your example, did you look at how it makes members of our church feel about Black Protestants generally?
That's such a great question. And that's actually the next step of the research. So we didn't do it in this one, but we asked people how it makes them feel about their own congregation. We have a clergy advisory board that helps us with the questions, and they really wanted to know those questions about how it helps people spiritually and how it makes them feel and attend their own congregation. But that's something that I'm really interested in. I just joined the board of the Interfaith Center here in Little Rock. And I think the next step is really trying to understand that if you can get people serving together across denominational lines, how that might change the way that they view other religions that previously they might have felt a little bit maybe prejudiced against or uncertain about. But when you get together and serve, might that
Yeah.
change?
It
Yeah.
makes sense that their first question is, how does it affect their spirituality? I suppose it's fine that that was your first step, Rebecca.
But it is interesting because it takes, leaders, bishops, or, Relief Society presidents to really think outside of the box because we're so set in the programs and in the ways that we do things, and they are successful and helpful to our congregations. But I think, making people aware of research like this and how really community-wide it would make such a difference if we could just, take a step back and more broadly look at, just combining some programs with other people. We just don't think of that very often.
If at least in Rexburg, if we see a new church pop up that's not our church, we kind of think of them as competition. We sort of think of them as like, hey, you're trying to steal people away from our church. And we don't necessarily think about like, what are they trying to do as outreach in the community, and where could we help them and work together on things that we both care about?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's actually, we've seen in our interviews with clergy from diverse religious traditions that that's a pretty common response when they think about partnering with others or, holding joint worship services. They might think, like there's a sheep stealing possibility there. We don't want our members to flee to or to say, "Wow, that was a really good. Look at that professionally trained pastor. I want to go listen to those sermons every week." Instead of people like me who might not be as articulate or have as much theological background. But we do see tons of great benefits for the congregation themselves when they do these projects, including ones across interfaith lines.
I have another question, Melissa. Sorry, you'll have to wait. Do you do you see any? Did you look if there's any effect of attitudes about the people receiving the service? So does it change attitudes about somebody who goes to a food bank? Did you look at that at all?
Yeah, that's a really good question too. Unfortunately, we didn't because each congregation had different programs that they might be doing, and we had one survey that went out to all of
Yeah,
them. So it was hard to
yeah,
specify
yeah, yeah.
the effects of that. But we do know that the effects are people feeling closer to God, feeling a deeper sense of gratitude, feeling more moments of like awe about the universe, things like that, that are spiritually beneficial for them. In terms of the actual people that they were interacting with, we just know that they feel warmer and more connected to their own congregation that they might be serving with.
And do you have any idea about why it is that participating in community service through a church makes a person feel like they can make a difference in politics or in their community?
Yeah, I think that it contributes to like a generalized efficacy that they're out there accomplishing something. So, for instance, after the US withdrew from Afghanistan, there were a number of Afghan refugees that came to Little Rock, and congregations worked together to help them, get placed and restart their lives and find housing and find jobs and carpool to kindergarten and teach them English and all kinds of things that they work together to help with that. And I think when they're doing something like that and seeing that they're having a real impact, that it makes people just feel like I can do things. I matter. My voice matters. If I act, I can have a real impact. And so that kind of contrasts to people who might be feeling like the system's rigged. There's nothing we can do. I'm just going to check
Mm.
out. People who are serving and seeing those results of their service feel that efficacy, feel that ability to enact change, and that they really matter.
Hmm.
Yeah, I really like this, Rebecca, because I feel like, at least as a missionary, if somebody was like barely hanging on to the church, or if there was somebody we were worried about talking about them in ward council and would say, what can we do to help this person? Then we would say, well, we need to encourage them to read their scriptures and pray. And we need to maybe take them a meal or maybe do some kind of service project. But rarely did we think about this idea of like, what if we got them involved in something that's going on? Or what if we started as a ward, like getting outside of our boundaries, our ward boundaries, and doing something good for the community and inviting. Like, it seems weird, right? Because we're like, we want them to go to church. And so we think, how do we get them to church? But your research kind of suggests that we could just think about how do we get them to get involved in their community? And then that could bring them to the church.
Yeah. And especially if they're doing that service and community engagement side by side with their own ward members, then they'll feel more connected. Like we're on the same playing field and we're working together towards the same goal of helping others. And, I think it's an eternal principle, right? To not think about ourselves, but to use our lives to think about others. And we'll see a large number of benefits from that.
It does make me think about some more, again, out of the box things that we could be doing. Like, for example, I think the very best sacrament meeting we've ever had is when we partook of the sacrament and then the bishop dismissed everybody to go help shovel snow off roofs for the rest of our congregation, right? Like, to me, that was better than hearing another 30-minute lecture on the Savior, even though I'm not saying that's not important, but I'm saying like that's something memorable that drew us together and also like made me feel close to Christ, right? I think about, Sunday school. Like there is nothing more boring than Sunday school. I'm sorry. And guess what? The same three people raise their hand and answer the same questions over and over. And
they're having fun and you're
they're
not,
having a
because you
great
should raise your
time. And
hand.
I'm looking at my watch. And I'm not saying that that this is all bad or wrong or anything, but I'm just wondering if we could think out of the box a little bit. I mean, what could make a 16 and 17-year-old Sunday school class more engaging than actually going and, participating in some sort of service work instead of sitting for 60 minutes for a lesson? I don't know. What do you think, Rebecca?
Yeah. I don't want to be in a position to rewrite the, church
Right.
curriculum, but, I remember when I teach youth Sunday school, so I very much think about how to get the youth excited about sitting in Sunday school with me for an hour. And I remember when we taught about King Mosiah and him, talking about service and giving your life for service, and when you're serving others, you're only in the service of God. At that class, I brought just some brown paper bags and a bunch of supplies and note cards. And we put together bags that they could put in the car. And if they're driving, that they could give to someone who might be asking for help, that had, just some food and maybe some warm gloves and a note from them, something about their testimony or about Christ that they were putting in there. So in that lesson, we kind of learned about the principle and then tried to put it into action. And then when they came back to class, they could talk about their experience and how they felt. And I love that my son, in the backseat of the car is like, mom, slow down. There's someone over there who needs help and wants to do that.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
So Rebecca, I'm going to change subjects from the book because there's so many things, other things I'd like to talk to you about. One of them's in the news. And our podcast, some other hosts on the podcast talked about it. And I didn't love the way that they discussed this topic because none of them are scholars and academics. So
Matt.
So
I cannot wait.
And by the way, those hosts hate me a little bit. And so now they're really I'm going to get a lot of hate mail.
Nobody hates you, Matt. Nobody hates you.
But I don't know if you're aware of this, Rebecca, because you travel a lot and maybe don't just read the Salt Lake Tribune in all of your spare time. But they had a story out this week about BYU faculty and the way that they feel about, fear about the Commissioner of Church Education and all of that stuff, which you feel free to discuss any of that if you want to. But my question for you is, you are a faithful member of our church and you are an awesome scholar who is not at a church school. And I think that a lot of people don't realize how many of you there are out there that are like that. What do you think is the benefit you get from being a scholar at a not church school? And have you ever thought about joining a church school and what would you think about that?
Yeah, I honestly don't know all the inside baseball of what's been going on with BYU faculty, but I can say that I love being out here in Arkansas in the mission field, as we sometimes call it, where we're a religious minority. I think it helps me and especially it's been such a blessing to do the research that I've done and be able to be in so many different worship services. And I can tell you that I have felt the Spirit in so many different places, hearing the choir at a Black Protestant church, doing prayers at a Muslim mosque, hearing a beautiful sermon from a rabbi at a Jewish temple. All of these places I have felt the Spirit, and it strengthens my testimony of how much God loves all of his children. And so I'm grateful for that. I will say that sometimes it's a little tricky down here in the South because there's a little bit of antagonism towards our church historically here. So when I'm meeting new faith leaders, I'll tell them that I'm a person of faith, but the first thing I say when I meet them is not, hey, I'm a Mormon, because I'm trying to build that relationship first. And then they know I'm a good person and doing good research and a person of faith. And then they're more likely to continue working with me even after they know my particular religious tradition. So there's pros and cons.
Yeah. You feel like you're able to do your part to build the kingdom even if you're not at BYU?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think that BYU is doing fantastic work. But I'm really happy outside of that bubble because I think that there's so many opportunities to connect with people from different faith traditions and to like learn to value that. Like I have to say, I love praise music and I was never encountered it until I lived in the South. But there's so many great congregations and just radio stations that play during the day that are just playing praise music because that's so much a part of the culture here that I wouldn't have been able to get if I was at a church school. But who knows what the future might be.
Did you grow up in Utah, Rebecca?
I did, yeah. I left to college in California right after I graduated high school.
You didn't even go to BYU?
I didn't. I know.
Do you feel awful inside? Like, oh my goodness, I turned my back on my faith.
No, I feel very good about my life choices. But when I
Listen, that was the best answer we've ever had on the podcast. No, Matt, I feel very good about my life choices.
I do have to say that when I go like hang out with other Mormon scholars, I'm the only one who doesn't have BYU in my CV. Like it's hard for people wouldn't be able to sneak it out just by looking at my CV.
I know. Whenever I'm trying to figure out if somebody's a member of our church, I look at their CV and I'm like, wait a minute. They didn't go to BYU. I don't think that they're
impossible.
A member. Yeah. Or have they ever presented research at BYU? Yeah, there's like these. The BYU is the way we try to figure out like who's a member of the church and who's not. So for me, when I left Utah, I found it like, I don't want to say liberating necessarily, but it was just a totally different world than what I experienced in Utah. And the church to me felt like a family more than like a social club, maybe. And the people I met in the Midwest were just so kind and just different than what I had encountered in Utah and Idaho. Did you have a similar experience?
Yeah, I left Utah when I was 18, so I was still pretty young, but I do feel when I attend worship services when I'm visiting family or am in Utah versus out in my ward in Little Rock, I do feel like there is a difference. I think people are just, I don't want to denigrate anyone. So but people are, it feels a little bit more authentic because in Little Rock, we have a ton of converts, of people who have moved in, people from all over the country. And like our fast and testimony meetings, there is not a minute of silence. People are coming up. They want to bear testimony. We have people who sing their testimonies. We have people who, tell fantastic stories about, living out in the country and what happened and their conversion experience. But there are so many people who are eager to testify that if you don't get up right away, you're going to miss your chance at fast and testimony. And sometimes when I am visiting Utah, I'll be like, what's happening here? Why is it quiet in this testimony meeting? It's so foreign to me. But yeah, people are just super authentic and super kind. I really love my ward.
It just almost feels a little bit more alive at church, right? A little more, yeah. I don't know the best way to describe. I don't even have the words to describe it, which is why I always ask people who don't live in Utah and Idaho to describe it, because I don't know how to describe it. But
I think the pressure for perfectionism is a little bit higher in Utah.
I think there's
Interesting.
definitely that. Whenever we go on vacation as a family, I try to be away on a Sunday, and I try to go to a church service in a place that's not Idaho or Utah, because I want my kids to experience that. And each of my children have told me at various times that like those experiences going to church outside of Utah had a huge impact on their testimony and on their desire to serve missions and their desire to like see they love seeing how the church is in other places, because it just feels sometimes so different from what you experience in Utah and Idaho.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. Melissa, do you go to church in other places when you're on vacation?
Matt, is this the part of the podcast where you call me out?
No.
Okay, listen, when I'm on vacation, I don't go to church. I'm gonna tell the truth because I don't feel the pressure to be perfect.
Good for you.
Yeah, that's okay, Melissa. So Melissa also didn't go to a church school.
That's
And
true. I did go to a church school for
Oh, that's right.
one semester. And then remember, I had you come up and move me out in the middle of the night because I was like, I cannot take this place. This is so crazy and
Yeah,
not
that's
for
right.
me. And I was like, Matt, I got to get out of here. And you drove up in the middle of the night and moved me
Yeah.
out. Do you remember that?
I do
Aw, what a
remember
good
that.
brother.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a good brother. But yeah, then I went somewhere that was more, right for me, for my personality. Yeah.
University of Utah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to just highlight what we've learned in the last minute or so.
Let's
Melissa
do.
went to University of Utah, and Melissa
And she
doesn't go
doesn't go
to
to church on vacation. Well, that's a wrap. That was a great podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.
No way, we're not going to end there. So where did you go to school, Rebecca?
I did my PhD at the University of California at Santa Barbara, and I did my undergrad at Cal State Channel Islands.
Oh,
So wait, Santa Barbara, are they on fire right now?
I think it's a little more south of Santa Barbara.
Oh, okay.
I do have people in California. Everybody is safe right now, but yeah, it's a mess.
Wait, now Santa Barbara is where, did you ever watch the TV show Psych?
Yes. Uh-huh.
That's
That
in
is
Santa Barbara, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Santa Barbara's like paradise.
It is. It's very beautiful. My library had an ocean view.
Wow.
It was hard to leave, but there's no way I could have afforded to stay.
And Little Rock, I drove through there a couple years ago. Not so much the same as Santa Barbara. It's got its own flair, its own feel.
A bit of a transition from Santa Barbara to Little Rock. But
Yeah.
the people, Southern hospitality is a thing. The people are super kind.
And your nearest temple is in Memphis, Tennessee?
That's right. I get to drive 3 hours each way to go to the
geez.
temple.
wow. Huh.
Right. Every time when we make predictions about temples, I try to pick a place that's 3 hours from the nearest temple and then say, okay, that's who's going to get a temple next. So Melissa, we're going to remember this.
Crossed.
Yeah.
Little Rock.
They just built one in Bentonville, which is in Northwest Arkansas. So there is a temple in the state of Arkansas, but it's also 3 hours away from us.
Right. That's far. And you have to go through the Ozark Mountains and stuff to get there. That's not yeah. Little Rock is a pretty big city. You guys could handle a temple.
I would love that story. Feel free to put a word in.
Yeah.
That'd be great if we have a temple here.
Yeah, okay. This is going to be my new prediction. We're going to
Okay.
put this out there. We're going to try and make this happen.
Okay, I'm going to keep
temple.
predicting Rigby, Idaho, and
Oh,
you
jeez.
start predicting Little Rock, Arkansas.
Right. Melissa predicts these like podunk little towns in Utah. And I'm like, people like Rebecca actually need a temple close by.
No, I'm not predicting what's needed. I'm just saying every time I turn the corner, there's another temple in Utah. So it feels like smart to predict that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Rebecca, I also like to ask people on the podcast about embarrassing things that have happened while they were in church.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you have
that I've done or that other people have done?
either one counts? I'm going to start with my story so that you can think of
Please.
one of your own, because as I tell this story, it'll maybe jog your memory. One time in church, we had an investigator. I think they call them friends now. We had an investigator at church. He was a little tipsy. And it was testimony meeting, and he was sitting in the back of the congregation heckling people. So this lady was talking about how in Pakistan there's sewage in the streets and dirty water, and he's like, sounds like Lawrence, Kansas. And then a woman got up to share her testimony. He's like, you know what I love about your church? That a woman can get up there dressed like a whore, and nobody seems to care at all. And then the missionaries at that point escorted him into the lobby area because they didn't want him heckling during testimony meeting. Have you ever had any embarrassing stories like that in church, Rebecca?
That's a story, boy.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Good
this
old
was in
Bob.
Kansas. All of these happened.
Yeah, this was one meeting in Kansas. Yeah.
Wow, Sunday not to be forgotten. Um, mm, I think the most embarrassing thing all out myself when my son was really young, right? Like I was just like frazzled. I was trying to get tenure. I was trying to take care of a toddler. I was teaching Relief Society. And I remember I scrambled. I got to church and I was sitting in church and I was like, something's off. And then I realized that I didn't put a bra on. And I was going to be standing in front of Relief Society and teaching. And I was like, I'm getting in the car,
This is
I'm
not.
driving home, and then I'll
Yeah.
be back when I'm fully dressed.
That's great. That is a good story, Rebecca. Oh, so one last topic I want to talk about, and then Melissa can ask more questions at the end if she wants to. You and I think, came of age in academia at around the same time. And I remember when I was younger, a lot of talks in the church about a woman should stay home, a woman shouldn't work, a woman's place is in the home, I guess is what they would say. What was that like for you, making a decision to pursue a career and pursue a family and all of that stuff at a time when maybe it wasn't the most popular decision?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking that. Um, I think for me, I've always, and this is just me personally, and I know that a lot of people don't have this experience, but I've always been able to carry at both times my relationship with God and then the things that church leaders are saying, and that those things have been separate. And so I've always had a close relationship with God, a spiritual gift that I'm very grateful for. And so I knew what I wanted. I knew that I loved learning. I mean, I was the kid who would have friends over and I'd be like, "Let's read." Like I knew that, and I actually didn't even know what graduate school was until a professor said to me, "Have you ever thought about grad school?" And I was like, "Wait, I can keep going to school. This is amazing. Sign me up." So I loved it and I felt good about what I was doing and what I was learning. And I felt good about my relationship with God. And so I guess it was easy for me to say, like, that is what their opinion is, but that's not what's right for my life. So I never felt the dissonance. I would sometimes get a little rankled when I didn't have my son until I had been married for 10 years. So there's a little bit of those conversations. Why are you working? Why aren't you having kids? But I always felt good about my relationship with God and about my life choices.
Yeah.
Were your parents supportive? Was your family supportive?
Yeah, my family's fantastic. My parents are just wonderful examples of Christ-like love to me and to I have 3 younger brothers, so I'm very grateful for them. Neither of them have college degrees, but they were really supportive of me.
That's so great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the comments at church, right? Or the comments at
Yeah.
wards, or yeah. And I think sometimes they're well intentioned, perhaps, if I'm trying to be like generous in the way people are. But to me, that's one of the hardest things about being a member of the church. It's just that sort of stuff, right? There's our relationship with the Lord, and then there's our relationship with the others at the church. And sometimes they want to dictate for us what our relationship with the Lord should look like. And that can be really hard to navigate sometimes.
Yeah, and I think it's gotten a lot better in recent years. I was super excited about the change to the Strength of Youth, that the focus is not on like, here are the rules of what you should be doing. It's about how do you feel in your relationship with God. And I think that, I mean, that sits right in my soul. So I am happy about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. Um, yeah, I appreciated that answer because I do feel like the church changes the way that it looks at things over time too, you know? And so, yeah, you've always just got to be in touch with what's right for you and have a relationship. So I like that answer. I'm going to circle back around to your research, and it might not be specifically about this, but I've been thinking a lot about social media and how we think that making a post on social media is the same as being engaged, or is the same as like sometimes we even think like I'm doing activism, like I'm participating in political activism or social activism just by making a post or just by commenting or just by reposting. um and I think that that's kind of the world that our teenagers and our young adults have grown up in. And so I'm just wondering how that connects back to your thoughts about like this engagement that you've talked about and done this research on. Okay. So is that the kind of engagement that we're actually needing and longing and seeking for? Or I don't know. I'm wondering your thoughts about it because it's just kind of been circling in my mind.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And one of the things that this research that I've done shows, and that lots of research shows, is that we have this epidemic of loneliness in the country. And in fact, it's really devastating to our health. So being lonely and not having social connections is as dangerous as smoking or obesity, or even worse. So, what getting out and actually serving and doing something in your community does is it puts you in contact with other people where you have those connections. And especially if you're doing it with members of your faith community, you're really building up relationships. And you don't do that as much online. Matt
But you think
probably
you do. You think you are.
Yes, yeah. Matt probably knows the political science literature talks about like grassroots activism, right? Like people getting together and organizing, and maybe even like lay members of a congregation saying, we really want to help with this problem that we see in our community. Let's do something about it. And then astroturf, which is like the fake activism, which is just like something that's really easy but doesn't actually engage you in doing much, like just reposting something.
Okay, yeah.
So this made me feel super old today, but I had a student, he's working on his senior paper, and he's interested in the 1994 election in Texas. And he was telling me how he's going to interview some people. And I was like, well, that's interesting because that was so long ago. Their interviews might not be like the best source of data. I said, maybe if you want to know what people were thinking at that time, why don't you go look in archives and look at letters to the editor? And he's like, what's that?
What's
I'm like, what do you mean? What's that? A letter to the editor. So I had to explain it to him, and then I showed him how you could get it and stuff. He's like, this is amazing. And as you guys were talking about that, I thought social media is the modern form of letters to the editor. It's just writing letters to the editor and putting out there in space. Maybe it matters, maybe it doesn't matter, but probably doesn't matter all that much. And in 30 years, people will be like, what was that? I don't know what that was. Why would you write a letter to a newspaper? That's a very strange behavior.
Yeah.
People were probably a lot more thoughtful about their letters to the editor than they are about their social media posts.
Yeah, honestly.
Hey, well, Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great getting to know you. I want to put a link to your book in the show notes, so we're going to do that. I strongly encourage our listeners to read her book. Rebecca is a scholar, and so sometimes, Melissa will tell you about this about my book, sometimes academic books are not that fun to read.
Mm-hmm.
This is not true about Rebecca's book.
Okay, good. I'm glad you mentioned that, Matt. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, she's a great writer.
That's really kind of you to say.
Yeah. So definitely check it out. And if you have a child who's not so sure they want to go to BYU, Idaho or BYU, you should look up Rebecca in Little Rock, Arkansas. You would not be sad to have her mentor your child in school. She's awesome. She's great.
Absolutely. I'd love to have them. Thank you guys for having me. This has been such a joy.
Yeah.
Hey, listener, we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for joining us.